Good evening and welcome to Champaign Public Library's webinar on legal help, how to avoid foreclosure with Angela Boley and Brett Kepley. Thanks to the team at Land of Lincoln Legal Aid for offering this informative presentation this evening. My name is Trisha Duzan and I'm the Adult Services Manager here at the Champaign Public Library, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight. At the bottom of your screen, I just want to go over a few features that are available to you through Zoom. There are icons located at the bottom of your screen depending on what kind of device you're using. There's volume control. You can increase your speaker, and you can also use the features to chat and raise your hand. These are some features that might be of use to you this evening. We will be presenting this webinar and taking questions at the end, so please hold any questions you might have until the end of the webinar. And please remember this is being recorded, so we ask that you be mindful of that, and we won't use any names for privacy reasons because of the recording. And without any further ado, I'll let Angela and Brett kick off the presentation. Thank you.
All right. My name is Angela Boley, and I am an attorney with Land of Lincoln Legal Aid. I've been with Land of Lincoln for about 8 years, and I practice in a variety of areas of law. It includes public benefits and foreclosure, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Brett, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Brett Kepley. I have been with Land of Lincoln, I think, for 5 years now. And prior to that, I was in private practice for about 30 years in the Champaign-Urbana area. And the areas that I practice with Land of Lincoln also involve foreclosure, defense, as well as bankruptcy, debtor creditor law, and other real estate matters.
All right. So first off, I just wanted to say a little bit about Land of Lincoln. We are a legal aid organization. That means that we provide free legal help for low-income people, and we have offices in Central and Southern Illinois. We cover a variety of areas of law. As you can see the list here: family, bankruptcy, eviction, foreclosure, public benefits appeals, sealing and expunging criminal records, and domestic violence. So those are some of the areas that we cover. If you need our help, you can go to our website at lincolnlegal.org, or you can call our hotline, 877-342-7891. All right, so let's get started. First, just what is a foreclosure? So it's where a person owns their own home, they have a mortgage. So if you own your own home and you don't have a mortgage on it, you can't have a foreclosure. So you have a mortgage, that means you owe money to the lender, and you've gotten behind with your mortgage payments, and you've gotten so far behind that you've been officially put into default. And your mortgage lender is calling the loan, and if you can't pay it back, they would like to take the house back. And so to do that, they file a foreclosure case. And so that's just the quick version of just what is a foreclosure. So a foreclosure happens when you have a mortgage and you can't make your payments, you've gotten behind. So let's start there. What happens if you get behind with your mortgage? If you're 1 month behind, it's probably not a big deal. You get caught up when you can, and the lender's not really going to do anything. But if something happens where you're going to be behind for, at least a few months, maybe even longer, then you've got a problem that could lead to foreclosure. So some of the things that could happen would be maybe you lose your job. Maybe you have a serious illness and you can't work for a little while, or maybe you become disabled. death of a spouse, that can be a loss of income. Sometimes just an increase in expenses, like all of a sudden you have a car repair and then you have something else, and then a couple months go by and you don't pay your mortgage. So that's some of the issues that can come up that, you need to be looking at, hey, is this going to lead to a foreclosure? So Brett, you want to talk about the next slide?
Yeah, forbearance. This is, that's a name given for the mortgage company agreeing to not collect or try to collect the mortgage payments at this time. So they forbear, and it's got to be done by an agreement from the mortgage company. So if you fall behind, you can reach out to them, try to explain your circumstance, and they may agree to hold off on trying to collect the mortgage under their rights. There is no law mandating a mortgage company to hold off on collecting if you fail to make the payments or do any of the other things you're supposed to do, which is, pay your taxes and keep your house insured. If the mortgage company agrees to forbear, they will advise on how long it's going to be typically. And that gives you time to figure out what you're going to do to try to resolve the issue. If the mortgage company will agree to a forbearance whereby at the end of the period of forbearance, you can resume your payments, and that usually will mean that the mortgage company has agreed to set whatever you fell behind on to the end of the mortgage. So you resume your payments. Let's say you miss March, you fall behind. You contact them and tell them you've lost income. So they might agree to forbear until June or July. And let's say you are able to resume payments in June or July. As part of that forbearance agreement, maybe they've decided to set aside all that money that you fell behind on to the end of the loan. So you keep paying as you are supposed to through the life of the loan. And then when you get to that last month that you normally would have been paid off, you're going to owe them that plus whatever you fell behind on plus interest. So that's the gist of a forbearance. And as I said, there's nothing under the law that mandates it, except for recently on federally backed loans. The presidents of the United States, Trump and then Biden, had ordered the federal agencies that regulate those loans to impose a forbearance during the period of the pandemic with payments to resume. And so that's the only time that has happened. So that's essentially forbearance.
Since you brought it up, what do you mean by federally backed mortgage?
Okay, when your bank gives you a loan, that bank might be insured by the federal government, so that if you default on that loan, the federal government is the one that has to pay the bank for the default. And now that default is transferred over to the federal government. And the government might use that bank to continue to service the loan, but since the bank is since the government is insuring the bank so that the bank is never going to suffer a loss, that makes it a federally backed loan. You can also have loans that originate from certain agencies directly, like Veterans Affairs, the VA. You can have veterans loans, USDA. You might have rural loans. These are typically done through banks. You can't have the agencies dealing directly. That's a rarity, but it's usually through banks, and the banks are insured by the federal government on those loans.
Okay, so you might have, your loan might be with like Chase or Bank of America or something like that, but you've really got, a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or FHA loan or something like that, and that's federally backed.
Right. Yeah. By the way, you guys might hear about Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. Those are corporations formed by, this is odd, they're separate corporate entities, but they are formed by the United States government, and they are their mission is to issue and administrate mortgage loans on for residential homes.
All right. Okay, so we've talked about where something happened and you're going to get behind, and you want to get ahead of it, and so you try to get a forbearance. So now we're going to talk about what if that didn't happen? What if you just didn't think to ask for a forbearance, or you just, time got passed and you didn't really realize it, and then you found yourself behind. So in my experience, 3 months is kind of the magic number. So if you're 3 months behind, that's when you're at risk for being found in default and going into foreclosure. So like I said before, if you're just a month or so behind, you're okay, but you have to watch it, because if you're carrying a month or two, then it just one more month and then you've kind of hit the number. So you want to be careful and try not to carry over months. If you do get behind, you want to catch up as soon as you can. So if you do hit the 3 months, and sometimes it'll be longer, sometimes they'll let you go like 6 months. But at some point, the lender is going to decide that you've been behind too long and they're going to find you in default. And with a big lender, so not like, your little neighborhood bank, but a big lender or a big servicer, they have a lot of departments. And so what they'll do is they'll kind of flag your loan and send it to the foreclosure department. They don't necessarily send you a letter saying, hey, if you don't pay by, January 31st, we're sending you to foreclosure. They'll send you letters saying past due, but they don't really tell you this is it. We're sending you to the other department. And so sometimes you'll find out because you'll go to pay and you're well behind and you'll go to pay, and then they just won't accept it. And that's what happens. That's when you're in default, they won't accept your payment. They've now, like a whole new process has started, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But when that happens, you can't just, make a payment and they'll accept it. There's a new process that you have to go through. And so if you have the money to catch up and they just won't take it, you have to do what's called a reinstatement. So we're going to talk about that. A reinstatement is where it's you're catching up, but there's rules to it. So first of all, you've got to be able to catch up with the monthly mortgage payments that you missed. So if you're behind 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, you have to pay those months. So that's a definite. But then there's also additional fees, because when they find your loan in default, like I said, it goes to a certain department and people work it up and an attorney reviews it. And so that's how you end up with these extra fees. And so you'll definitely have their attorney's costs. And then if they filed the case with the court, then, if they actually started the foreclosure, then there's court costs associated with that. And so they're going to pass all that on to you. They're going to want you to pay for all that. So in order to catch up, you need to pay these 3 things: the mortgage payments, the attorney's fees, and the court costs, all in one lump sum. So they're kind of like, look, you've been paying month to month. That didn't work out. You got behind. Now we're going to need you to pay all in one lump sum. And the way this works is you can reinstate before they file the foreclosure. If you're in the default, but they haven't quite filed it yet, you can reinstate. And what you do is you contact the lender and ask them, what's the amount? You know, what's the number that I have to pay? You get the exact number and you pay that, and you've reinstated. The other thing is, if they've actually filed a foreclosure case, you can also reinstate. And they have to let you reinstate for the first 90 days by rule. So if they filed the foreclosure case in the early part of it, in the first couple of months, if you can come up with that money, you can reinstate, and then the foreclosure goes away and you're right back where you started. Now, a lot of lenders will let you reinstate after that 90 days. It's just that it's not, you know, they don't have to accept it, but they often will. So I want to explain a little bit about what happens when a foreclosure case is filed. And when I say filed, that's like a thing that attorneys say. It just means that the court case has started. So what happens is, you know, you've gotten behind, they sent it to the foreclosure department, they prepared paperwork, and they file what's essentially a lawsuit against you for the amount of the mortgage that you still owe. So you find out about this because you get served with a summons. So someone will come to your house and, you know, hand you the paperwork to let you know that this court case has happened. And that's how you find out that you're in foreclosure. And what will happen is, on the summons, it will give you a court date. And that's, you need to show up, and that starts the whole process. Now, in Champaign County, we have a mediation program. So a few years ago, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, Illinois started mediation programs for foreclosure, and different counties chose whether or not to participate. And so Champaign County is one of the counties that does participate. And so what this means is, if you get served a summons and you get that court date, you don't actually go in front of a judge. You go to the courthouse, but you meet with somebody and you learn about the process of mediation and the options you have to try to avoid ending up losing your house. And so that program, the way it works is, you know, they kind of figured out that if we could just get the homeowner and the lender to kind of talk and, you know, figure things out, there might be a way that they can work it out and the homeowner can keep the house. So, so that's what mediation is for. Land of Lincoln is participates in this program. So, you know, we may be, you know, representing you. If you're eligible for our services, we could be representing you and helping you through that process. But even if it's not us, you know, you could do it without an attorney or hire your own attorney to, you know, help you try to avoid the whole foreclosure. So that's something that happens here. Brett, you want to mention what happens in counties that don't have mediation?
Yeah. And many counties in central Illinois do not elect to have mediation, which means the lawsuit proceeds like any other lawsuit. You get served with the lawsuit papers and you have to respond to the lawsuit paper. The lawsuit is a claim, right? So the mortgage company is suing you on a claim that you failed to make payments under your loan or otherwise violated the loan, and therefore they are owed money, and therefore they are entitled to put your house up for sale to pay for that debt. And without mediation, then you have to immediately respond in court to that claim. If you do not respond to that claim, just as in any other lawsuit, if you do not respond when you are supposed to, then the claimant can win their claim by default, it is called. And thus the claimant can get everything that they are asking for right away. If you go into the mitigation procedure, as Angela has noted, that puts a halt to the process of prevailing on their claim. So you try to, it's like a timeout where you're trying to work out a deal with the mortgage company. If a deal cannot be worked out, then the mitigation can be declared at an end, and then the claimant can proceed with the lawsuit. The homeowner can proceed in defending the lawsuit. Maybe there's a dispute about whether the defendant complied or not with the loan, and the defendant wants to defend that. The defendant is the party against whom a claim is made. So that's the process of litigation. That's the real meaning of mitigation, is to hold off on proceeding with the lawsuit. And as I said, most counties in East Central Illinois do not have a mitigation program. And that doesn't mean you can't work out a deal with the mortgage company before the mortgage company goes full bore on pursuing its claim in the lawsuit. But they are not mandated to sit down in a timeout to try to negotiate something. Now, most mortgage companies would like to resolve it. They really don't want your house. They don't want to sell the house. They want your money. They want you to be able to pay. And that's what they're looking for. But they're not obligated to negotiate anything if there's no mitigation program. So the moral of the story is, depends on what county you're in. The mortgage company might be forced to negotiate with you before they can proceed in their lawsuit. But if there is no mitigation program, they will not. Champaign has one, as Angela noted. Macon County has one. But other counties, Piatt, Coles, Piatt does not, Coles does not, DeWitt County does not. I don't think Ford County does. So
Yeah, no, really the only ones around here is Champaign and Macon.
Champaign and Macon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this has to do with residential real estate. If you are an owner of some commercial property that you defaulted on your mortgage, there's not really loss mitigation for that either.
That's right. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about loss mitigation. And I'm using that term because that's the term that the lender is going to use. And so even though it's a little weird and it's not a term that regular people would use, that's what it's called. And it's basically, just what are your options to avoid losing your house through foreclosure. So it's a little confusing because the term foreclosure means like the whole court case and the whole process. But it also means like the end, like if you go through the whole court process and in the end lose your house, then you've been foreclosed upon. But you can be in foreclosure and then, go through some of these options and then be out of foreclosure. There are a variety of options. I've decided to just focus on two. These are kind of the two main ones, but there are some other options. So, if you were to sort of, if you're in the situation and you do some reading, you might find some other options. So the first one is a loan modification. And so what this is where you're trying to kind of restructure your loan to deal with the fact that you have racked up this past due balance. And so you don't get to get any free months, you don't get, they don't just go away. So at some point, the months that you didn't pay, you have to pay for. But if you've racked up a balance that now you don't have the money to catch up, that's what we talked about with reinstatement. If you had the money, you could do reinstatement. But if you don't, then we have to figure out how are we going to get you back on track. And that is a loan modification. And so the way you get that is you have to go through an application process. most mortgage lenders have some sort of form that you can just go online and download. It'll be called loss mitigation or loan modification application. And that's what you want to do. And what that is where you kind of explain to the lender what happened. This is why I got behind. This is what my income is now. This is what my expenses are. And what they'll do is it's kind of like refinancing, where they'll just re-look at everything and figure out, are you a person that can afford this loan? Do we need to lower the payments? Do we need to raise the payments? And so, you'd be paying a little extra, and that's how you'd catch up. And so they kind of look at all your information and come up with an offer. If they think that you just simply don't have the income to make, any kind of real payments, then you might get denied for the loan modification. If you have gotten behind just too many times in the past and gotten loan modifications in the past, at a certain point, they may just be like, look, we can't restructure it anymore, and you get denied. But generally, if your situation, happened where you were out of work for 6 months, now you're back at work, and you're making decent money. It's just, what do we do with this time period that you got behind? Then, you'd be a good candidate for a loan modification. And usually what they do is they will put you on a trial payment plan. So they come up with a figure. Sometimes it is similar to what your normal mortgage payment is. Like I said, sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher. And they'll have you do a trial payment period for 3 months. And if you can make those payments for 3 months, then they're like, okay, everything's settled down. You're able to make your payments. We'll modify the loan and basically put the past due balance at the end. And then you make that new payment and the foreclosure goes away. So this is really a great program for situations where, look, circumstances changed. You are still able to make a payment. We just have to deal with the loan. So that's something that is a great program. The problems are, it's very difficult to get them the paperwork that they need. So you have to really pay attention and stay on top of the process, because you'll send in everything and then they'll say, well, no, we need another bank statement. And if you wait too long, you send it in and they're like, no, now we need more pay stubs, and the whole process can kind of drag on. So if you pay attention and you give them what they need, then they will review you and hopefully approve you for a loan modification. So that's kind of that process. That's something that I help my clients with, so that they can, get back on track and save their house. Brett, you want to talk a little bit about the options for sale?
Yeah. The one thing you can do to get out of the debt and recover your equity is simply to try to sell your home. And when I say equity, that means the value of your home is greater than the total debt owed on it. So if you have a house worth $100,000 and you only owe $50,000 on the mortgage, you've got $50,000 worth of equity. So it would behoove you to try to sell your home if you are otherwise going to lose it, because if you have no defense to the claim of the mortgage company that you have breached your loan agreement, you have no defense, then they can ultimately come in and ask the court to put the house up for sale to pay the debt. And if the house in fact is sold at it's typically what's called an auction, a public auction, either held by the judge or held by the sheriff's department. And at this auction, bids are taken, and If the bids are not enough to pay off your debt, you're going to have remaining debt, but you will lose the house for sure. So on that $100,000 house where you owe only $50,000, it's an awful shame that you lost that extra 50 in equity. So while the foreclosure is going on, maybe you try to sell the house. You can hire a realtor, just like you normally would, even if you weren't in a foreclosure. And you find a buyer for a price that will pay off the mortgage in full, and you get to pocket some. You could do that. And that bails you out of the problem of owing money and losing your equity. Now, what happens if you can't? So what happens if the debt is so high that it's worth more than what the house is worth? Suppose your house is worth $100,000 and you owe $110,000 on your mortgage because you've been so far behind so much. Then the only reason you would try to sell your house is to get the lender to agree to accept whatever the house sells for, and the lender agrees to let you off the hook on the balance. That's called a short sale. That's because you're selling the house at a price short of what it takes to pay off the debt in full. And if you can get the lender to agree, and you have got to get the lender to agree, because the lender has the mortgage. What is the mortgage? It is a claim in the property. It is a right to seize the property in a foreclosure lawsuit and sell it. That's what a mortgage is. And that mortgage stays on that property until the mortgage company agrees to release it. And they're not going to agree to release it if they don't get paid in full, unless you convince them that the house is selling for as much as it possibly could. Then you might be able to get them to agree to the short sale. So if the house can only sell for $90,000 and you owe 110, what's that? That's 20,000 in the hole. Well, on a short sale, if the mortgage company will agree to the sale, then they will release their mortgage. If the mortgage company does not agree to release their mortgage, you won't be able to have a sale, because a buyer is not going to buy property that has a mortgage attached to it, because that lender could come in at a later date and foreclose on that mortgage, and that buyer loses the property. So short sale, you can do it, and you would do it so that the lender doesn't pursue you for any shortfall on the debt, and the lender will agree to release the lien. So that's, you might hear the term short sale used. That's what that means.
All right. So let's say you end up, with a foreclosure. The court case takes a long time. And the reason why is because, our laws are there to protect homeowners. So we don't want homeowners losing their houses to the bank. And the bank itself doesn't want to be a landlord. They don't want to own your house. So the process, the lender has to jump through some hoops to be able to take your home. And so because of those protections, there's a process through the court system. It generally, the fastest it would go would be 6 months. And it often takes longer, more like 9 months or even a year. So it kind of just depends on how fast the lender goes. So you might hear, about, your neighbor or your friend who was in foreclosure for like a year. And you might hear somebody else, it was 6 months. And so it kind of just depends on the particulars of that case and how fast or slow it moves through the court system. But generally, it's going to take a little while. So when you get that summons, you don't think, oh my God, I'm losing the house, I have to move out right away. That's not the case. Now, if you're a renter and you're going through eviction, that process moves very quickly. But if you're a homeowner, the process moves much slower. So that process is there to give you an opportunity to try to figure something out. So when you get that summons, now's the time to be like, okay, I've gotten behind, this is it, they filed a case, I have to do something. You don't want to sit around and waste those months, but you do have some time. And so you want to figure out, okay, what are my options? And part of that is going to be figuring out what makes sense for you. Sometimes you own a house and your circumstances have changed and that house is just too expensive. Maybe it's too big, maybe it's in a neighborhood that's just not appropriate for you anymore. And so sometimes it doesn't make sense and you have to kind of let it go. And so that's what that process can be sometimes, is just recognizing that it's not appropriate for me anymore financially. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. It just means that it didn't work out and I need to make the best financial choices for myself. And it may mean not keeping the house. That could mean that you sell it, short sale, regular sale, that kind of thing. It could also mean that you let the process go through. And so if the process does go through, you will get notices from the court that tell you where you're at in the process. There'll be a point where, you know, you come to court just to figure out where you're at. There'll be a point where there's a judgment entered saying, okay, we're giving the house back to the lender. But even when that happens, there's still time. So then there'll be time before the house is set for sale at auction. When you get to that point, the sale date, that's when you're kind of towards the end. So if you're going to do something, you want to do it in that first few months. But at a certain point, there'll be a sale date. You'll get a notice. But even that's not when you have to move out. There'll be the sale date. There'll be another court hearing. And then that's when they give you the date that you have to be out by. So obviously, you know, we want to talk about ways to avoid foreclosure, but even if that process happens, you do have quite a while to figure out what's going on, where are you going to go, what are your options, can you afford it? So you want to use that time wisely to figure out, you know, what's best for you and what you can get done. So if you find yourself either really behind and you're worried about a foreclosure, or a foreclosure case has been filed and you've received a summons, those are reasons why you might want to seek some help. So one thing you can do is just contact your mortgage lender. Now, it can be a pain if it's this giant company and you got to go through a lot of messages and press a lot of buttons, but it's a good idea to talk to somebody at your mortgage lender to figure out what your options are. That's where you can do the forbearance, reinstatement, loan modification, short sale. All of that is going to be from talking to your lender. They're going to send you letters in the mail talking about these options, giving you phone numbers to call. So it's a good idea to do that. The second idea is to try to get some legal help. So you might just look for an attorney who specializes in foreclosures. You might contact Land of Lincoln. Land of Lincoln serves people who are low income, but you know, there's a range there. And we've helped many people who are homeowners. So if that's something where you're just you've got some questions or you're not sure about the court process or default or any of that, feel free to give us a call and we'll see if we can give you some advice and maybe even jump in and represent you in the case. That is all I have. Brett, do you have any last words?
Yeah, let me briefly mention one other method for avoiding foreclosure or curing the foreclosure problem is bankruptcy. Bankruptcy can be used, it's a federal law, federal code. It can be used to try to bring yourself current if you are behind on a mortgage. And it would be done so under the auspice of a bankruptcy court. As bankruptcy is federal law, it is governed and administrated in federal courts. The things that Angela and I have been talking about in foreclosure typically are state court matters, although you can have a foreclosure in federal court if the mortgage is federally insured or federally backed. The bank there can bring an action in federal court, but bankruptcy is a special set of courts dealing exclusively with bankruptcy matters. And you can file a bankruptcy to try to stop the foreclosure. And in that bankruptcy, you have to come up with a plan, and it has to be approved by the bankruptcy judge, a plan to bring yourself current on the mortgage or to pay off the mortgage. And if that plan is approved, then that mortgage company must follow that plan. And that would perforce mean the foreclosure lawsuit would be dismissed if there was a foreclosure lawsuit going on at the time of the filing of the bankruptcy by you, the person that owes the money. You might file a bankruptcy before a foreclosure lawsuit is filed by the mortgage company to try to head things off. But in either case, bankruptcy is a possible option. It's going to depend on what your income. You're going to have some kind of a plan to repay. And if you are unemployed and have no income, you're not going to likely be able to succeed in any kind of a bankruptcy plan to get your default under the mortgage cured. And it's complicated, and that is a thing where you really should seek legal help in trying to do a bankruptcy. If the bankruptcy is successful, though, that avoids the foreclosure. Obviously, if you default in the future under your plan, then you're going to be back where you were prior to the filing of the bankruptcy. Other than that, everything that Angela has noted are some of the methods for trying to avoid losing your home and some of the rights that you have against a mortgage company that is trying to take your house away by the act of foreclosure. And so again, if you qualify economically for legal aid, try to reach out to us. Or if you have friends that have this problem and would qualify. If you make a little bit too much money, you might not qualify for us. The recommendation is you still should seek legal counsel, because foreclosure is, along with bankruptcy, a hideously complicated process, and you have lots of rights, and you should be able to afford yourself of those rights. So that's about the only other thing I have to add to anything that we've talked about this evening.
All right. Well, thank you for your attention, and I think that's it.